Hello, I'm Lucy.
And I'm Michelle.
And welcome to another episode of Tudoriferous, the biographical podcast that examines lives in the Tudor era. And that's the first time I've not had to read it.
It's been years. And today, part 2.
Of Margaret of Burgundy / York.
York, yes.
Excellent. Well, I should sit here and enjoy my cup of tea. And you can tell me a story.
I can tell you a story.
Mm-hmm.
We take up Margaret's story immediately after her marriage.
Mm-hmm.
She is the pretty bauble at court whom everyone is watching, waiting for her to show signs of pregnancy.
I think I have been seduced by Henry VII's talk because I see her as the Wicked Witch of the West, that sort of look.
Yes.
And she's not like that at all. If you look, the picture of her. She's young, sweet.
Yeah. Well, it's not just Henry VII. Yeah, it's not just Henry VII, though. You've also got Louis XI, and then you've got the two historians, Polydore Virgil and Edward Hall. Ooh, Edward Hall.
And Bernard Andre. I mean, he really laid into her. If that counts for anything.
Yeah. Edward Hall's history is online.
Excellent.
The whole thing.
Ah.
It's been scanned in, so you have to flip pages. It's not like as if somebody's transcribed it. It's actually scanned in. I'll send you the link. It's pretty cool.
Very good.
So we do have quite a bit about her, but yet all of those people didn't like her.
Yeah, it's funny because I've seen a picture of her. I know what she looks like. Well, from the portrait anyway. If that counts. And yet I still see her as this sort of little wizen creature. I suppose it's the hat as much as anything, the wimple or the hennin or whatever you call it, that makes her look like the Wicked Witch of the West.
Also that they used the camera obscura.
I like that.
To make her. So she's got that distorted, very large forehead. And
that was very popular, the large forehead, wasn't it?
Yeah, they used to pluck their hair to make their forehead larger because it made them, or they thought it appeared that they were smarter.
I would say plucking hair out of your head is not smarter.
No.
I think that's a stupid thing to do.
No. It went to an extreme during Elizabeth's time. It went way back.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. We've got sidetracked already.
Yes. Her only other role is to be the visible and very expensive sign of the alliance with England, with a great side dish of giving Louis XI of France anxiety. That's all she's there for. Did he suffer
from anxiety? I don't see him as an anxiety sufferer.
Well, that's why he was so adamant in defaming her, was because whoever had the alliance with England during the 100 Years' War, usually, or whoever had the alliance with Burgundy, ended up winning whatever battles. So if they were on France's side, France would win those battles. If they were on England's side, England would win the battles. So it is the good possibility of losing territory. And we need to think, we'll go more into it this episode. Charles was just swallowing up land through conquest and negotiations and everything. And part of that, he was going after French land.
And think how furious Louis XI would have been if he knew that his son had just said, no, you take it, I'm off to Italy.
Yeah. Whoops.
Yeah.
Gosh, after all that work. Margaret, so far, had spent a large amount of her time in London prior to her marriage. So we think that she'd be ready for the large cities in Burgundy. But there's a big difference between London and Bruges. Bruges is where she is at the beginning of the marriage. The Thames in London is... Geography lesson. I don't know if anybody listens to this that doesn't know the geography of England. So just so you know, the Thames goes from the ocean to London.
Yeah, I've been up it. It goes, up through, went as far as Oxford. Yeah. Just read 3 Men in a Boat and you'll know all about the Thames. Read it anyway. It's a wonderful book.
I've never read that one either. I'm getting this long list of things trying to read in between, 3 Men in a Boat?
Yeah.
Writing that down.
Lovely book.
The Thames was regularly dredged. This meant that the large ships that were bringing in product from the ocean could actually travel all the way up to London to have that there's goods removed from the boat or disembarked or whatever you unloaded. I need a script. There is a word. I know there's a word. What is that word?
It's when you're not loading something. Now, what is it now? Come
on. Bruges didn't do that. Bruges was unable, or they didn't have the cost. We're not entirely sure, but they didn't have the rivers dredged. So while it originally was the center of trade with all of the unloading of merchandise into their docks, it couldn't be done anymore. So the shipping had actually moved farther downriver towards the ocean. However,
that is such a short-sighted view, isn't it? Dredge the damn river, and you'll recoup benefit later.
Yeah, massive amounts of money. Either that, or they decided that they didn't need to. Because even though they didn't dredge the river, it still remained the conversion point for all of the trade routes in Northern Europe, Northwestern Europe. Even though the merchandise itself wasn't being unloaded, most merchant trader families and groups would have their headquarters and trade houses in Bruges. We should probably explain what a trade house is. Okay.
Perhaps we want to have a glossary at the end.
Yes. A trade house, at least at that time, I don't know if this is still the case, was the central location of a merchant or a merchant's family that acted as the location for housing their goods that they were transporting for trade. So everything would be brought to a central location and then dispersed. And they were held there while they determined when was the optimum time to release that good.
Yeah, we heard in Jakob Fugger's episode that he had, in his house, there was living quarters and there were storage quarters for everything.
Yes. So let's say, and London didn't have these trade centers, so they specialized specifically trade houses in international trade, sometimes solely trading on currency. And currency trading still happens today. You make money based on the exchange rate. A good example of this is the Medici's trade house that was often used as a bank. They would send a note rather than the actual cash saying, please release this amount of money to this ruler, to that particular trade house. So they would also be banks.
And sometimes the banks were in hospitals. We came across that with Leonardo.
Yeah, and the Knights Templar. They were originally a bank. So rather than risking you losing your wealth as it traveled, you just send a note and you hold money in different places.
It seems incredibly modern. I wasn't expecting that there was you could have a sort of banker's draft or something. I didn't realise that they did that before. When we did Leonardo, and he arranged for money to be collected for him in Florence. He thought, wow,
yeah.
I didn't realise.
Yeah. It seems so advanced.
Yes.
The accumulation of trading houses also meant that it was the center in Europe for any kind of financial currency exchange as well, which could be taxed. So Bruges had the benefit of taxing the exchange of goods and taxing the exchange of money. So the city was very wealthy, which meant it was a place that the ruler would want to stay. Also, there are a ton of things available. Margaret would have suddenly been provided with the widest range of luxuries available throughout the entire year rather than strictly seasonally.
She must have suddenly realised that she'd been living in a backwater all her life without knowing it. And suddenly get to this place and you think, we haven't got that in London. We definitely don't have those.
No.
Must have been a hell of an eye-opener.
Yeah.
She must have been writing back to her brother saying, do you realise you govern a complete dump?
You are so far behind.
Yes.
A good number of luxuries came from Bruges to England. They were very close in proximity. Margaret no longer had to wait for them to be shipped to London or reduced numbers being available. I really should write a script.
I write a script. My memory for words is so bad that if I don't write a script, we'd spend all time doing this.
You've got a group of merchants that would not trade in a single item. Single item trading was dangerous. Let's say you're trading in, raisins. Let's start with raisins. Raisins, while dried, do spoil over time. So you would send your stuff from Bruges to England or wherever else, and you were hoping to hit the right timeline. If other ships got there first with a bunch of raisins, the price would plummet because the market was glutted. You had more than that would be sold.
Yeah.
Then you either have to sell it for a pittance, lose it to spoilage, or attempt to ship it somewhere else in order to make some sort of profit. But then that shipping also costs you money. So to avoid this...
And the danger, moving things about more. Piracy, shipwreck.
Yeah.
Getting across that damn channel, we know how difficult that is, don't we?
Yeah. To avoid that, merchants would reduce the amount of something that they were trading and fill their boats with a bunch of different items. So once it would get to London, you'd almost have to be there first to make sure you got whatever that was that you were looking for or found out about. So quite often you'd get to London and say, I want this much of this. And they'd say, I'm sorry, we're all out. You'll have to wait till or when another shipment will come, if another shipment will come. That was huge in cloth.
Right.
Because getting the exact same cloth next time is very rare. You got dye lots, different patterns of weaving. So some things were, as soon as they were available, they were snapped up as quickly as possible because you knew it wasn't coming back. And she would have lived through this in London. Now she's in Bruges. She can go directly to the trade house where the most amount of goods are and the most variety. She really would be like the first time somebody going to a shopping mall. Everything's there. Everything's available.
Spoiled for choice.
And it would be cheaper because they haven't had to go through the cost of shipping it yet again to somewhere farther away.
I suppose that's why she was so friendly with William Caxton.
Yeah. Hello, William Caxton. I need you to handle my money. That's always... He's a financial advisor. And all of a sudden he's a printer.
He went through many personas.
Yeah. I guess, actually, he's more like we are now, where we change our profession several times in
rather
our lives.
Than how we were 50 years ago when you started work at 16 and knocked off at 60.
And you stayed doing that your entire life.
Wearing the same suit, day in, day out.
Yes.
Actually, more than 50. That only takes you
Possibly
to the 70s.
70s? Did it still happen in the 70s?
No, I'm saying it's more than 50, isn't it? It's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Possibly most important to Margaret were books. Bruges was the location of the most master craftsmen of bookmaking, bookbinding.
Lovely.
And printing. William Caxton, he got the idea from being in Bruges. Margaret loved books. I think we've mentioned before that you can't know what you want unless you know it exists. I remember us having this discussion sometime. If you don't know it exists, you don't know you want it.
No.
She now has access to almost every book in print or illuminated manuscripts in Europe.
Oh dear, that's like when Amazon started, isn't it? Dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. And she took advantage of this for the rest of her life. And I love this journal article that I found. So historian Sharon, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounce this, I think it's Mikalov. Could be Mikalov, but I like Mikalov.
I do, it's a lovely name.
She wrote a journal article called Women as Book Collectors and Disseminators of Culture in Late Medieval England and Burgundy. It was a fantastic read. Loved it. And Margaret's in it. She loved books so much that not only did she purchase some for herself, keep in mind, she had access to the Burgundian Library, which was one of the largest holdings of books in Europe.
Yeah, I think
she already
Philip
had
the
that.
Good, a collector, I think, wasn't he? Charles the Bolstad.
And Charles continued to accumulate books. So not only did she have that and have full access to that, she began collecting her own library on top of that.
Never enough.
Never enough. I'm the same.
Yes.
And then we also see how much she loved books because she bought them for gifts for people. That was her number one go-to. I'm going to buy you illuminated manuscripts. I'm going to buy you books, printed books, and I'm going to give them to singular people like families, godchildren, but also religious houses. They often got illuminated manuscripts. So you can see her loving books and her saying, you need to read this. You really need to read this. Have you read this? And giving it to people.
It's very frustrating when you know that people don't read books and you think, well, bottle of wine it is then, I suppose. Yeah, because books are a good present.
They're a wonderful present. If you can sort of guess what the person likes. That's the difficult part. Matching the book to the person.
Yeah.
It's almost like you need a book tasting instead of a wine tasting. Business opportunity.
Yes.
We also know just how impressive the Burgundian library and Margaret's love of books was because later, after Edward visits Burgundy, he begins the English Royal Library in hopes of eventually matching the Burgundian one.
I think he must have felt like the poor relation when he went over there, mustn't he?
We're cavemen.
Yes. I haven't got books.
Haven't got books. Bruges was the most wealthiest capital or country in the world, or set of a conglomeration of territories. It's not really a country, but it kind of is.
Well, they were the Estates General, weren't they? All of the places joined together.
Yes. Yes. Quite democratic in a way. For the time.
Yeah.
Though she spent quite a bit of time in Bruges, it wasn't the capital for court government. It was the wealthiest city, but it was not the actual court governmental situated city. Unlike England, Margaret now had to learn to be a transient ruler's wife. There was no central government location. These holdings are disparate. They're far apart. The only way for this to work is if the government works for a while in this city, then picks up and moves to the next. And picks up and moves to the next.
Was England unique in staying put? I mean, you had progressions, but they weren't the same. Scotland, maybe. Yeah,
sort of. Even though the court was more of a procession for the royalty just to be viewed. But the majority of court functions would remain in one spot. So you'd make your decisions elsewhere and then send the instructions back to London, for example, for England, or Paris for France. You would move. Some of your court would move, but you'd always, like Dudley and Empson, have a core group left behind to continue the country running.
Yes, and John Morton. I've been researching John Morton, and if there was a problem, then Henry would go one way, Morton would stay put, so that there was always somebody back home to hold the fort. Yeah.
So Burgundy is completely unique. The entire court, everything, documentation, you name it, had to pick up and move.
Ferdinand did something similar, didn't he? Because I remember him saying the reason he hadn't paid the dowry for Catherine, one of his many, many excuses, was that he'd left the documentation in one of the many places that his transitory government ended up. So he couldn't remember which one it was, so he just had to pick it up next time around.
That would make sense, especially since Ferdinand was still trying to combine Castile and Aragon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Naples.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Naples. Poor Naples. Because of the itinerancy of this, as their new Duchess, Margaret was going to be required to move practically continually. It just sounded exhausting the more we put this together. Just to put numbers, this is a spoiler alert. She was Duchess for only 8.5 years. And she would go on 28 major journeys, meaning she'd be traveling for weeks on each one of those steps to the next destination. Non-stop.
Only 8 years? Gosh, yeah. She piled a lot in, didn't she, in those 8 years?
Yeah. So for roughly 3 times a year, she'd be moving for at least half that year.
That sounds pointless, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I'm going to spend a week here, a week here, a week here, a week here, and spend most of my time on horseback or in a litter. Just exhausting. Absolutely exhausting.
Only Maximilian had somebody either reading to him or that he was dictating his novel to. So presumably she could read as well.
Well, they also brought minstrels and everything with them to keep them. But I like to be settled. So to me, this is not appealing in any way, shape, or form.
No, don't want it.
Yeah. Another interesting fact is we don't have any record at all of Margaret spending any time in the Duchy of Burgundy at all.
None.
She never got there. It was one of the few settled areas that didn't have rebellions or didn't have discontent. So there was no point in the ruler actually being there. There was nothing to do. I was thinking, vacation? Go there for a vacation?
Yeah, it's like the head teachers never see the good kids, do they?
Yeah. Very true. The first 3 years of her being married to Charles, Margaret was restricted to being only used as the visible authority of the ducal power. That's it. You are there to remind them that I have a duke. You don't get involved. You don't open your mouth. You might host some parties. If an ambassador comes, you're welcome to host a dinner, but don't you dare speak to them. Yeah.
She must have been champing at the bit, I would think.
Yeah. And I think it might have been even more difficult and boring is because there never comes a child. And this is central to Margaret's life. Even though they've been together for 3 years, we're now in 1472, there is no baby. Margaret does not ever manage to have children. We have records of her making several pilgrimages to shrines that would help women who were childless. We have records of Mary, her stepdaughter, going with her. But no children would come. For a little over a month in 1473, she stayed at Josh. Oh, this is going to be so bad. I tried to get Google to tell me how to pronounce this. Saint Josh Tenud. It's a country house that Philip the Good, Charles's father, had built as sort of a health spa to try to get herself able to have children. None of it worked. Margaret remains childless.
Had Charles had children? Oh, of course he had. He had
Mary.
Mary, yes. Yeah.
With his second wife. His first wife, no children. Oddly, unlike Henry VIII that we will cover in season 3, actually season 2, that's
two,
next season.
Two,
We're
next
getting so close.
Yeah. He's looming.
He's looming. He's very much looming.
Yeah.
We don't see any discord between Charles and Margaret for the lack of children, which I thought was fantastic.
Yes, because if he's only got a daughter, a dad child, really.
Yes, they don't have Salic law, so she will inherit.
Yes, she did.
But
she did, yeah.
She's not a boy.
She's not a boy.
She is a boy without a winkle.
She is.
We also don't see any mentions of any of the government records stating that anyone was trying to get rid of her because she was childless. Nobody's recommending it. Interesting.
Maybe that's a Burgundian thing.
I don't know. I see it, in the end, I saw this as because of how much she was loved.
Right.
Nobody. There are no records anywhere of them saying, you know what, you could have a helpful marriage with a treaty here and maybe have more children. Doesn't seem to happen. Instead, we see records of Charles using the fact that there is no male heir to his advantage in negotiations for Mary's wedding. You're going to get this when I die, so I want this now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never seems to hold it against her. Yeah, I'm just sitting here like, soak this in. This is so unusual. There are so many marriages that got annulled due to childlessness.
Yeah.
Like, that was one of the things that you could have a marriage annulled for.
Actually, I was saying almost the woman's fault. Of course, not with Lucretia Borgia, but yes. Nearly always the woman's fault.
Yes. Yeah. Lucretia Borgia, coming soon.
On Patreon.
Tudoriferous Patreon. Do you dare?
So Maximilian desperately wanted Mary to marry Mary because there was no male heir. She was an extremely wealthy prize, and Charles could get more out of anybody because of this, and he uses that to advantage. What I am happy about for Margaret's sake is that Charles does not appear to treat her poorly at all, not even because she doesn't have any children. And Charles is not a kind man.
Yeah, I'm surprised about that. I had assumed that the marriage would be thoroughly miserable because, having read about him, I would have thought I wouldn't want to be married to him.
Yeah. Yeah. He probably will get his own episode.
Mm-hmm.
But
probably on Patreon.
Yes, Patreon. For example, he was so unpleasant that he was criticized for his behavior by members of his own Golden Fleece organization for being too severe with his servants. They chastised him. Philip de Comines, who we have spoken about in previous episodes, most recently Charles VIII.
Yeah, the one with the boring voice.
Yes. He left Charles of Burgundy's service to go to the French because of how unpleasant he was. So I would have expected him to be just as unpleasant with his wife, but it wasn't mentioned anywhere.
Well, that's quite gratifying. I was sort of bracing myself to hear some quite unpleasant stuff.
So was I, as I started reading, as I'm getting this build-up from all these historians about what Charles was like. I was like, oh, you poor woman. Wait, what? Okay.
Because sometimes you get these quite aggressive men and the women say, oh, he's not like that with me. And you think, is it just you haven't noticed? But evidently, perhaps he wasn't like that with her.
Possibly. It could also be the fact that they spent little time together.
I was wondering about that, about not having the child, because he was always off fighting, wasn't he?
Some have said that one of the reasons may be because Margaret was just as hardworking as Charles, if not as exacting, definitely not cruel or severe. Margaret ended up loved by practically everybody that was around her, whereas Charles was definitely not.
No.
We do have only one painting showing her and Charles hunting together. And it may tell us that they spent time together outside of duty, but it also could have been propaganda.
Yeah, I mean,
paintings like
it's not a photograph, is it? I mean, it's...
Yeah. Yeah, they can make up whatever they want as the background of it. We also are taking the assumption that Margaret liked hunting for the fact that she's in that portrait. We don't actually know if she does. We do know that she loved to read, and we do know that she played chess. But she may have also liked hunting and falconry because those were Mary's favorite pastimes. And she spent a great deal of time with Mary. It is possible that Charles and Margaret did admire each other. Possibly not for looks. They are quite different heights. But they enjoyed the same things. So I don't know. It's just the fact that he doesn't berate her for being childless never comes up. And that is unusual.
Yes, when you consider what's going to happen across the channel. Yes, that's very unusual.
And as you said, a good possibility for why they remain childless is the lack of time they spent together.
And maybe he recognised that. So, yeah.
Probably. I
mean, if he desperately wanted a child, he'd have spent more time with her.
Yeah. Charles was almost continually doing battle, either to maintain his territories against rebellions or to gain new territories so he wouldn't have to negotiate going from one territory to another.
Oh, what? So to fill in the gaps?
Yes, exactly. He really wanted to make another Roman Empire, basically. Yeah. Yeah, we'll definitely do an episodes on him. Interesting character. I am not good at math, so thankfully historian Christine Whiteman summed it up for us. They spent a total of 1 year's worth of time together for the first 7 years they were married.
Yeah, that's not the way to go if you want an offspring, I wouldn't have thought.
No, especially when you're only fertile for a certain length of time each month. Maybe they just timed it poorly?
Yeah.
You came back at the wrong time. You're only here for a week.
Yes.
Hey, what's wrong with you?
Yes, definitely the wrong week.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I'm pretty sure that Charles must have admired Margaret is that Margaret didn't have children, but the Duke continued to be kind in his generosity to her. In 1472, a fire broke out at one of her palaces. Come with me, if you will.
Oh, right, yeah.
It destroyed possibly the majority of her household property. And remember, they took all of their household goods from one house to another when they were in attendance. And while they were at Malle, M-A-E-L-E, it caught fire and took out almost everything. The Duke stopped what he was doing and rushed to her to make sure she was okay, and then started giving her money to rebuild. To put in perspective this loss, Margaret claimed she lost approximately 60,000 crowns worth of jewelry, furniture, clothing, tapestries. Everything was gone.
Yeah, but everyone bumps it up in a claim, don't they?
Very true. Very true.
Not that I ever have.
I've never made a claim, thankfully.
I've never made a claim.
Knock on wood.
No.
I've never had anything like that happen that I've had to.
Yeah. Still keep paying out the insurance, though. It's what a waste.
Not really. Margaret, for both being loved and the fact that many cities were hoping that she'd now make their home or their city her home, gathered together funds to help replace what she had lost, as well as receiving help from her husband, which, since her dowry wasn't paid, she was not entitled to at all.
Oh, yeah.
It's 1472, and he still has only received the first installment. 40-some-odd thousand of the 200,000 he was supposed to pay. Good job, Edward.
Do you think he had it? Do you think Edward ever had it? Ever had any intention?
I don't think so. We're still at 1472, so he's still fighting with Warwick. Margaret's life as Duchess was going to be an extremely busy one. We mentioned that she had to travel a lot. She had to show herself as the ducal authority to all of Charles's territories since he was away. The nature of those territories meant she also spent most of her time in cities and areas that were unsettled or rebellious. This was not safe. She was never safe. Hence...
Yeah, she's been shunted to war zones all the time.
And that's why part of her dowry required an English bodyguard. We mentioned that at the beginning, and at the time I thought, why would she need an English bodyguard? 100% loyal to her.
Yeah.
She doesn't have to rely on somebody that may become rebellious.
And at that time, I suppose they didn't know what the relationship would be like between her and Charles. Could they trust Charles to provide one?
Well, no, Charles put that in
right.
that she needed. A bodyguard, an English bodyguard.
Oh, I see.
So yeah, both her husband and her brother knew she was going to not be safe.
They still sent her out there, though.
Very interesting. But with an English bodyguard. Quite a few of them. I think, what was it, 800? 800 archers and stuff? I can't remember that number exactly because there was so much I had to leave out. We know more about her than we do about Margaret Beaufort. Yeah. I spent more time reading about her than I did about Isabel for the Patreon episodes, actually. There was more available, which was very surprising.
Is that because Burgundy was just very good at keeping records?
Yes, partly that, and partly because Ferdinand did his best to make sure that he became the person that everybody spoke about. At least that's my opinion.
You didn't like
Thanks,
Ferdinand.
I did not like Ferdinand. You didn't really like Ferdinand either.
No, I admire him because I admire him. I don't admire him because he's not the. Wouldn't want to be with him for one
was
second.
Effective.
But yes, he was clever.
He was very effective,
but not in a good way.
This is where I learned something very interesting to me. Those cities that she visited, even if they were territories that were rebellious or very rebellious, did their best to try to keep her there. And I don't mean kidnapping. I mean that they were asking her to make that city her main residence. So you go on a trip, you come back here. You go on another trip, you come back here. We can use Mons as an example. Whenever Margaret arrived there, she would receive extravagant, luxurious gifts. Wines, gold plate, jewels, not just to her, but also to her entourage in the hopes that they would encourage her to stay there. I really like these people. They gave me gold cloth, that kind of thing. And they entertained her every time she visited.
And it must have been very tempting for her just to think, oh, yeah, I'll just stay here.
And everybody likes me.
Yeah.
Even when she wasn't at Mons, they sent her gifts. So she'd be at a different city and she'd receive gifts from the city she had left.
Saying, please come back, please.
Yeah, when her house burnt down, Mons sent her 600 crowns. They were one of the first cities to send her money. And they sent her more than the first couple of cities to start purchasing household goods again to make sure she was comfortable. My question was why? And we figure this out later when Mary becomes the Duchess. Mary ends up making Mons her primary city of residence due to how much they helped her stepmother. And that brought in a ton of money to Mons. They ended up very wealthy because of this. Wherever the court was, came the ambassadors, supplicants to the court, and they all had to be provisioned and housed at their own cost, which means they were now spending money in that city. The money that came into cities whenever a duke or duchess was in residence was a lot. So yes, they wanted it there. Also, something I didn't consider before is if the ruler is there during holidays, and there are a lot of holidays in the Catholic calendar at the time, churches and monasteries and convents would receive large donations from all of those wealthy, prominent visitors from the ducal household. And the city would then benefit because those monasteries would then take care of the poor and create the hospitals.
Yes.
It was like really a top-down effect, which doesn't exist now.
No.
Everybody thinks we're going to give the wealthy their tax cuts and they'll take care of the poor. Yeah, no, they don't.
Yes, it's a bit like when cities host the Olympic Games and you think, well, this will bring in loads. And it never does. It always ends up costing.
Does. A lot of money. A lot of money.
But in those days, obviously, it did work.
It did work. It did work. At one point, it did. So the city's initial generosity, in essence, is a major investment in their city, and Mons really reaped the rewards in this case. Margaret herself, in order to maintain the Duke's reputation, spent a lot of money. She had to keep her and her household, which was around 150 people, in fine clothing, jewelry. She kept a large number of musicians, artists, chronicles around her to show the importance of the Duke's power. And those chroniclers then gave us information.
Right.
Thank you, Margaret, for keeping them. I really appreciate it. As the first years of her marriage passed, Margaret began her political career, possibly influenced by the fact she didn't have children. She wasn't pregnant. When you're pregnant, you're tired. I don't speak from experience, but I have heard quite a bit.
Yes. It's knackering.
Yeah, and at this time, people were so scared when women were pregnant, they would often reduce their duties down to practically nothing if they were wealthy enough to make sure they carried the child to term. You spent your time embroidering, doing calm things. You weren't supposed to get upset. Like there was quite a scare around people, especially when you were in a ruler's point where you needed to provide an heir.
Yes. No, when we get to Lucretia Borgia, her husband, she had a miscarriage, and her husband was furious with her because she'd been dancing at the party, and so the next time she didn't dance. She sat them all out. So
yes, don't you dare. If you're pregnant, you would not be available even to do these things. Quite often you were off doing something quiet, calm, make sure you're eating enough, make sure you're not moving too much, which I think actually isn't the best.
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
Aren't you supposed to stay fit?
Yeah.
She doesn't have children, so she has time. Nobody's stopping her from doing anything. We see in 1473, for the first time, she attended the chapter of the Order of the Golden Fleece in the Duke's stead, which I also thought was interesting because these were politically prominent people she was now talking to.
Yeah, I thought she wasn't allowed to.
Yeah. This is where it starts. She wasn't giving them orders or anything, but she was now put in a position of authority to host that event. She then began meeting with ambassadors, but meeting with them, not entertaining them, talking with them.
She's going to get ideas if she's not careful, aren't she?
Yes. She then started hearing petitions when her husband wasn't available instead of the counselors he had been using for the previous years. Not all the time. It seemed to be very gradual. And I can't say if she inserted herself or if the Duke requested it. All I can say is he didn't stop it. And for somebody with very definitive ideas about women, which we will cover in his episode, that is a surprise.
Maybe he saw she was doing a good job and thought, well, perhaps women aren't so fuzzy and fluffy and thinking about kittens all the time. Maybe they have got something to offer.
He has to have thought of something, because at the beginning of their marriage, absolutely not. This is your role. This is women's role. Like, he didn't even want women in court because they were too silly to be around. And silly at that time meant stupid. Well, sort of. It was moving from...
Blessed, wasn't it, originally?
Yeah, blessed. It was moving from that to innocent, and from innocent to now stupid. She had to have impressed him somehow. She was intelligent, not only intelligent, but trustworthy, because she's now making decisions without getting information from him. And if he hadn't approved of what she was doing, it would have been kibosh. There is no question about that.
Also, she's well read as well. That probably helped.
Yes. Yeah. She's very intelligent. During this time, we also need to keep in mind that she is spending a great deal of her time with her stepdaughter, Mary. They loved each other dearly. The affection was definitely on both sides. They spent more time together than they spent apart, which wasn't required. That was not a requirement. And they weren't that far off in age. They were 11 years off. And to us, that seems like it's a great amount between a 22-year-old and an 11-year-old when they first meet. But we also have to remember that children were forced to be adults quite early.
Yes, 11's then was not the 11 now, is it? Quite.
No, in one more year, she was ready to marry.
Yeah.
Yeah, be a bride at 12. Some of the time that they were forced to spend apart, it tells you what kind of a father Charles was because poor Mary had to stay at the city of Ghent and at the city of Brussels as a hostage for her father's loans for the wars he was engaging in. We're back to Maximilian and Bianca.
Yes.
Keep my daughter.
Yeah, we were rather shocked about Maximilian, but I think it's rather more common than we thought at that point. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Maximilian.
This is your heir.
We were maligning him.
And specifically at Ghent, Ghent was the political nexus. So this is where the major event in government would possibly happen. While as Bruges, as we said, was the commercial nexus. So one was the most wealthy that could provide the money. The other was the most available to provide men in arms. So that's where she got to stay when her daddy was off fighting. Sometimes.
Thanks, Dad.
From Mary, Margaret...
Thanks, Dad.
Oh, thanks, Dad. From Mary, Margaret learned Dutch, since Burgundy included the area now known as the Netherlands, and she improved her French. Margaret taught Mary how to speak English. We don't know how much time Margaret spent with her mother-in-law, Isabel, but we do know that they exchanged letters often and apparently were quite fond of each other, which is also unusual. Is it unusual, or is that just a trope? Maybe it's just a trope.
I mean, certainly there were mother-in-law jokes, weren't there? But, I mean, I got on fine with mine.
Yeah. Margaret was intelligent and thorough. She was obviously conscientious because not only was she allowed to continue interfering, really, but she also gained the trust and respect of the court and the ambassadors. They now realized that she could handle things, so she started gradually becoming more and more powerful. She ended up working very closely with them while Charles was away, which is practically most of the time. And because of that, she began to start raising troops and gather money and to support his military adventures.
Oh, well, that's handy practice for later, isn't it?
Yeah. And she was very successful at it. In fact, she was able to start gathering more money and resources than her husband was able to. Yeah. He could demand and be rejected. She would ask, and it would be granted. Very unusual. To show the difference in how they were received by rebellious areas, Ghent being one of them, Ghent did not like Charles. Tommaso Portinari, the Medici's agent, we mentioned him in the first episode.
Yeah, I was just thinking that name rings a bell. Yes, the first episode.
Yes, so he's providing money for Charles. He was almost killed during an uprising in Ghent. And the uprising was against Charles. He's providing money for Charles. So we want to kill him. He is very much the focus. He was saved by Margaret.
Oh.
She's there. She's in Ghent during this uprising. She speaks for him, negotiated and managed to get his release, and then took him with her when she was allowed to leave.
What, quite openly, or did she just disguise him?
Openly.
Oh.
Nope. They just rode out. So Ghent's rebelling against her husband. Not only was she not taken as a hostage, but she took other hostages with her when she left. Like, that's hard to comprehend.
Do they not understand how hostages work?
No. It just boggles the mind. Do you want to rebel against Charles? Yes. Keep his wife. Hold her.
Yeah.
Don't let her go. She will eventually be his, I don't know. Well, would he pay for her? I don't know.
Maybe that's it. He sent them a letter saying, "Keep her. I don't need it. I can get another one."
Oh, good. Oh, no. And I meant goodness, not good. It's examples like this that seem to be one of the reasons why Louis was afraid of her.
Right.
Charles didn't have full control. She seemed to. So Louis wants property back, and the person who could possibly scupper this seems to be Margaret. So those rumors of her promiscuity, in fact, there's one where she went off to that spa to have an illegitimate child while Charles was away.
Yeah, that's a common slur, isn't it?
That comes back with Perkin Warbeck.
Yes.
He's that illegitimate child.
Oh, of course it all fits together now. That's who he was.
Yeah, he's actually Margaret's son.
Yep.
But I agree with Louis. Louis does need to be scared. This is a big example of her managing a situation during a full-on city rebellion and coming up on top, unscathed.
And it probably wouldn't even consider her to start with, and then probably news was filtering in saying, actually, she's doing pretty well.
And you're like, uh-oh.
Yes.
Not only is she there as a symbol of England being in an alliance, so I'm now fighting two countries, but she's got support more than her husband does. Yeah, this is not gonna go well. So yes, he continued to try to badmouth her entire life.
Yeah, I suppose he must have been thinking a bit like Charles VIII about Naples, that they're going to give in really easily anyway because they can't stand their ruler. And he must have been thinking the same. But then suddenly they've got a ruler that they seem to like. That scuppers that plan, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you're rebelling against Charles, but you're giving his wife gifts. Yeah, that says a lot. You're not actually going to try to cede from being part of the Burgundian territories because you're giving somebody else still gifts. I'm just telling you how angry I am, kind of thing. Yeah. I didn't find a single historian or document that said the territories that her husband controlled, that anyone didn't love her. None. It says so much about her character and probably her generosity. She put aside money for orphans and widows. We know she made donations to religious houses and practically everywhere she went. She was an extremely pious woman.
Very pious. She saw Jesus in the bedroom or something, didn't she?
Yes. Oh, dear. She also made donations to cities when things were damaged. So she was helping them keep themselves going.
See, that's the way to do it. Yes, Charles hadn't got a clue, really, has he? I mean, that...
No, he was a very cruel man. But she also had to have some sort of charisma. You've got all these ambassadors in the courtiers. No, courtiers, I can never tell the difference. The government court people, and then you've got the courtiers that are in court just being sycophants.
Yeah.
They loved her. They were willing to listen to her. They were willing to let her tell them what to do. And these are men listening to a woman.
Yeah, that's unnatural.
Yeah, you have to have some impressive charisma for that. I think I would have loved to have met her and just watch her operate. How did you do that? Yeah, I can't see her stamping her foot anymore in this helpless rage.
No, I suppose if you're nice and kind and people think, oh, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to tell her, and then she sort of disarms you by smiling and being pleasant.
Being lovely.
Yeah. And you come out thinking, oh, hang on, what's I going there to do?
Yes. Damn it.
I seem to have given her our city. Oh, well, never mind. I'm sure it's fine. Yes.
Margaret developed her household to match parallel to her husband's household, but on a much smaller scale, of course. She doesn't need as many people. She's not the government. She's there to support the government. And she did this deliberately to be able to support the governmental body when Charles was not available, which wasn't the way it was at the beginning of the marriage. So she's subtly making changes as she's going on.
And he definitely knows about this. It's not that
100%.
He's away and she's making the most of it.
No, she's making decisions. Charles is aware of her making these decisions. And this didn't happen until after 3 or 4 years in, and it slowly developed. She didn't just jump into it and be like, hey, I'm the Duke's wife and I'm going to take charge. It was little by little, hour by hour, and it really may have been that cautious, gentle advance that allowed her to do so. You're going to give me a little, and a little while later I'll try a bit more, and we'll just see how we do. It's like training a horse or a dog. You go little by little for those specialty, and you do much better with treats than you do with yelling or being mean. This is kind of the way I saw it. Through the eyes of a dog.
And I suppose if they only had Charles to look to, they must be thinking, well, thank goodness for that. Somebody sane.
I'll at least be able to get through my entire sentence without somebody throwing something at me if I go talk to her. So instead of Charles using a chancellor to handle legal matters, the Duchess began deciding cases regarding law as well. And that was slowly being introduced. It was about 1474 or 5, so it took a while for this kind of thing to happen. Remember, she started stepping in 1472. So it did take a while. She was great at not being rushed. And then in 1476, we see Margaret is now working very closely with Charles's council. All of a sudden, she's part of that council. Maybe not officially, but she's there. Military action was increasing. He was working on gaining new territory, but they were also getting more and more rebellions happening in the areas he had conquered. He had moved on, and now he's not there, so they're rebelling. And he did not treat them well, so they had no love for him. Let's just say cruelty was his normal mode of practice. Whether it had been her own intelligence or just the desperate need of someone to represent him in these areas that was not him and not his meanness, I can't honestly say. But the fact that she's mentioned as being in charge tells us that someone had to trust her enough to make these critical decisions on how to maintain law and order while her husband was away. And unlike Anne of Brittany with Charles VIII, just following orders we see flying back and forth across the border, Charles doesn't send letters to tell Margaret what to do. I'm not saying they don't exist, but we don't have them.
So it's entirely her own initiative.
Sure seems like it. I don't see... I was not able to find anything, and there's a lot available for her. From Charles saying, I want you to do this, or her sending him saying, this is happening, what are my orders? Nothing. I got nothing. It could exist, I just don't have it.
Do you get, this is happening, but I've done this, so don't worry? Do you get letters like that?
Don't have that either, actually. But none of the other historians mentioned that she was following orders. They all put it forward as if it's her initiative and she's making the decisions. Somebody, like, I don't know, somebody out there would have said, she's just a woman.
Yeah.
You would think that would come up. Margaret's control and political activism included her proposing her own people for certain governmental roles in various cities. And not all at once. So you'd see her recommend one person to a place in Mons, one person to a position in Ghent. And that was slowly increasing. And you can imagine that's her setting up for in the future for her being able to say, I would like to see this. And those people now owe her their position. It would make her more palatable to listen to.
Yeah.
They would owe her. So again, a slow, gentle takeover rather than a wipe everybody out and take over.
Yeah, because the wipe everybody out and take over lasts as long as you're there and then gone. And then you've got to do it all over again. Wipe everybody out.
Yes. And this is lovely. And she's doing exactly what she possibly supposed to do in her mind. But this also could have gone horribly, horribly wrong. Margaret's entire position, according to Charles, is to be a visual sign of the lasting alliance between Burgundy and England against France. And this is another place where we see Margaret somehow hold her own. Before the first year was up in their marriage, so we're going back in time a bit, 1470, Edward was removed from the throne and was sent in exile.
Yes. So she's not a lot of use to him, to Charles.
No.
You'd have thought with the lack of well, I suppose by that point they didn't know there was going to be a lack of children, but yeah.
Yeah. She's non-existent value. She's no longer the sister of the King of England, but the sister of a usurper who has now been imprisoned or in exile, back and forth. And he had only provided less than a quarter of her dowry.
I suppose it did give Charles the incentive to try and get Edward back on the throne, because otherwise he's got a dud wife.
Well, there's the problem. Instead of England helping him, he now has to help England. Charles basically had married into the wrong side of the War of the Roses.
Yes, he could have taken it out on her.
Yeah. And if you think about it, she's started discussing with people. So she's 2 years away from actually pushing herself forward with her political activism. And right now, she's useless. Not only that, she was now required, in order to bring up her value, to try to reconcile her brothers, Edward and George, Duke of Clarence. Yeah. Clarence didn't want to listen to her, yet. Charles was embarrassed even more to be married to her when Edward fled from England and arrived in Burgundy, penniless and expecting his brother-in-law to help him. Yeah. Now there's not only no alliance between England and Burgundy, England is firmly on the side of France, because France has been helping Margaret of Anjou.
And Burgundy has sided with what is effectively the wrong one.
Yeah.
The usurper.
Yeah.
Yes, they've made a big mistake there.
Yeah. And Louis takes advantage of it. Louis dives in to try to claim back territory from Charles, so he starts fighting with Burgundy.
So it really is. It's been a catastrophe.
Absolute catastrophe. Yeah. This forces Charles into helping Edward get back his throne because he does not have enough men or resources to keep France out and keep the territories he's just collected, trying to increase the size of Burgundy. He's worked himself too thin. He had been acting as if he had England on his side, so France was neutralized. And now, not only is France not neutralized, they have an alliance with England and can get England mercenaries, armies, money. Yeah. So, it was only when Louis starts attacking Burgundy that Charles says, okay, Margaret, you can invite Edward to the Burgundian court. We need to get him back on the throne. Prior to that, Charles had said, absolutely no, they have to stay away from court. I don't want to acknowledge that they're here. I don't want to exacerbate the situation with Louis.
Right, I remember them being stuck on the coast or somewhere, didn't they?
Yeah.
Right. Well, that explains everything.
So Louis shoots himself in the foot.
Oh.
He's like, I'm going to invade your territories, the Burgundian holdings, and now you're going to get Edward back on the throne, which she does. And this is where Margaret got her first taste of being a political advisor and negotiator. And I think this is one of those times where Charles is like, you know what? She's not an idiot.
Mm.
She met with both of her brothers, Edward and Clarence, to try to find an accommodation between the two of them. And this time she succeeded. That's who managed to reconcile the brothers.
Right.
It was her. And they both acknowledged that later. Both of them acknowledged the fact that she was the one who managed to do it. So she gets them talking together. They're like, yes, we're back to being brothers. And they're off to go get the crown. Margaret then spends her first time getting support and money for Edward from the merchants of Burgundy and the territories of Burgundy. And they start paying.
Well, I suppose, yes, they've got every incentive to... Because if the trade with England is going to France now, they presumably want it back.
Yes. But at the same time, I'm talking about the merchants from Burgundy and the cities from Burgundy. The ones that don't like her husband are now spending money to give Edward money and men.
Yeah, but I was just thinking if they were used to doing trade with England from Burgundy.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if presumably that a lot of that trade is now going to France.
Oh, yeah, good point.
So they've got to get it back.
Yes, they do. You're right.
Cloth and that sort of thing. Or wool.
Yeah. But she's the one doing it, not Charles. She's the one asking for it. And they give it to her. This is also where Margaret recommends her business advisor to her brother Clarence.
You're right. Your business advisor is going to be somebody relevant.
Mm-hmm. We've mentioned him lots.
Is he Caxton?
Yes, he is.
Right. Oh, it's like the old quiz days.
William Caxton is off to England. Caxton was most likely brought up because it was after that visit when Edward returned to England that he began building the Royal Library. And they can't build a Royal Library if they don't have a printer.
Ah. Ooh.
So that would have been one of the reasons why she sent him over. Printed books weren't quite a thing in England yet.
No.
And Edward was extremely impressed with the Burgundian library. And he started making his own library. This is also where we start seeing Burgundian architecture come over to England. And you can see a very famous example of that I didn't realize. Hampton Court.
Right, yes.
I didn't realize that the patterning of different color bricks was a Burgundian invention.
Oh. Yeah, I think you still see that sort of thing in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
What I remember. I haven't been there for a while, but yes.
They did it a lot in their roofs. Their roofs are stunning.
Oh, lovely.
When they mentioned this, I started looking at pictures of areas in Burgundy. And just gorgeous. It really is nice. I'm not sure why, but when the battle finally happened where Warwick is killed, you see Margaret doing damage control for her brother's reputation. I'm not sure if it's because her stepmother was related to Warwick, but she starts sending letters saying that Edward didn't kill Warwick or have him killed. She says other people killed Warwick while Edward was trying to get to where he was to rescue him.
Okay.
I'm not sure why. And she sends this to quite a number of people. Like, no, he's good. I don't know if it's because she's still trying to reconcile the fact that she's now the queen or the sister of the king again, and she's trying to reestablish her value to Charles and to the Burgundians. But this is also a dabble in politics.
Yeah, I suppose all the siblings, well, she seemed to be very close to all her siblings, didn't she? And maybe she just wants him to have a better reputation
Possibly. I don't know. But it's still, like, the fact that she's still defending her brothers, I don't know. It still says that she must have grown up in a loving household for her family to be that close later. I don't know. I never got the understanding of that. I just thought that the only thing I could think of was because she was trying to make sure that, no, Edward's a good king, we're still a good alliance.
Yeah. I mean, certainly it helps her, because we do not want Edward to be usurped again, because it's, to be knocked off the throne rather than usurped.
Please don't make me useless. With Edward king again, her placement in Burgundy was more secure, and there was a possibility of her dowry actually being paid, and they started negotiating for that again. Margaret was rewarded for her loyalty to her brother and for helping Edward. He granted her licenses to export cloth free from custom duties. That's a huge advantage. So she could export cloth from England and be able to sell the cloth at a lower price than others to make a profit.
Right.
And she kept this for all of Edward's life. But there was still no payment of the dowry installments.
Well, we've been here before somewhere.
Yeah. Margaret over lifetime ends up with a number of licenses similar to this, but yeah, Edward did not hold up his side of the dowry. He didn't pay it.
He couldn't afford to, could he? Could he afford to? No.
I don't know. But he was buying a lot of books.
Well, she might understand that and think, well, yeah, that's what I'd do.
In 1476, he was still promising to pay the debt for her dowry. It never happens. We need to talk about the dowry. The status of the dowry for Margaret and for any woman is critical. And this was fascinating. I didn't realize it. But if the dowry isn't paid, the dower lands, should her husband die, are not provided to the widow. The dowry is basically purchasing those lands.
So if Charles were to die, she is...
a pauper.
Yeah, I was going to say penniless. Probably not quite penniless, but not living the life she was expecting.
Yeah, so the dower lands basically are... Dowry pays for the dower lands. The dower lands provide the income for her after her husband passes. It also means that Burgundy, the country, would be angry that no money was given. I believe there was an English king who got a wife that didn't bring a dowry and she was loathed. Who is that? Margaret wrote to her husband Charles asking him to explain her situation with the dowry not being paid. And he tells her that she's not going to get the full settlement of her dower lands if the dowry isn't paid.
Right.
I'm not giving you anything. But again, a little later, we see Charles actually admiring his wife because he assures her later that she was going to receive everything that Edward had paid for, as well as granting her an additional dower income of 40,000 crowns per year without the payment from Edward.
Do you think he said the original bit, assuming that it would get back to Edward?
Oh, I don't know.
And that he would think, oh, well, I don't want my poor sister to be out of pocket.
I honestly don't know. But she's definitely not entitled to that 40,000 crowns per year. In 1475, Margaret finally got to meet again with her brother Edward. Charles's behavior had forced the northern lands that he occupied to revolt, full-on revolt. And the French again were taking advantage of the unrest. Edward, upholding only one part of the whole marriage alliance, shows up to fight against the French. But when he arrives on the continent, Charles isn't there. He isn't available. He's still fighting. He's off trying to keep control of the lands. Edward doesn't accept that. That's rude. It goes very much against protocol. So Margaret has to rush down to Calais to greet him and to attempt to soothe ruffled feathers because Charles wasn't there.
I suppose Edward's a king. Charles is just a duke. Edward might have thought, no, hang on, I'm a king. You come and meet me.
Yeah. Not so good. Charles refuses to leave the area that he was militarily involved in. So Margaret is also required to oversee the arrangements for the ships to bring the English military over to Burgundy. So Edward wasn't going to pay for everything. Burgundy has to pay for it. He'll provide the men and arms, but come on, you at least have to bring us here. You have to provide the transportation. Yeah, interesting.
He's pushing it a bit for someone who's not paid a dowry, isn't he?
Yeah, that's what I thought. But Charles technically is desperate. If you're going to push at any time, it's this time. We won't go into too many details, but suffice it to say that England arrived.
Oh, good.
And scared Louis enough to pay Edward to go away.
Ah.
And also scared him enough to create a treaty or agree to a treaty between Burgundy and France. Yay, it's over. Margaret was again rewarded for her negotiations with her brother, with more licensing allowing her to have additional merchandise as duty-free exports from England. But I'm still not paying your dowry. I've gotten $40,000 or $50,000 a year from France, but I'm not going to pay your dowry.
I suppose he might think, in effect, he is paying the dowry, but it's not actually coming out of his pocket. It's coming out of somebody else's pocket.
It's also being paid to Margaret, not to Charles or Burgundy for the dower lands.
Yeah, that's true.
She doesn't pay for it. That's what gets me.
Yeah.
It's like, you're getting the money. You could give it to Charles for your dower lands. No, that's Edward's debt. That's not my debt.
Well, she's got a point there. He did promise the money.
You are my brother. You are supposed to be paying for this.
It might be quite humiliating to pay your own dowry as well.
Oh, gosh, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Please take me as your wife. I'm giving you money. I don't want most of this episode to end up being, and then Margaret went and got more men, and then Margaret got more money, and then she went and got more men, and then she went and got more money. Charles is going to battle again. I need to get more men and money. For 6 years, Margaret spent her time going from area to area, negotiating for more money and for men for Charles for his battles. He never stopped fighting. The only positive side of Charles being away is that Margaret might have been having fun helping to negotiate the marriage between Mary and Maximilian. That would be something fun to do. Yeah, you would think. The wars were not going well. The rebellions were not going well. And yet, Margaret was still able to enter the cities that were under rebellion. I don't know how she does that. I honestly don't.
Yeah.
But it has to say something about her character.
And she must surely have known that she was going to be safe, otherwise she wouldn't have done it. But how would she have known?
How would you know you're safe?
Yeah.
They're trying to get rid of your husband, and you show up to show his authority.
Which does make you wonder whether, I mean, she is the obvious hostage.
Yes. And she's got Mary with her a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm bringing both of us into a danger.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that Mary would make a very good hostage, but it does make me wonder whether Charles had said, if you take her, I'm not getting her back.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Because otherwise, she is setting up, I mean, it could be worse for Charles if you think, oh, there's a place rebelling. Oh, I've got my wife as a hostage just on top of it all.
And my heir.
She could
my only child.
She could be making it a lot worse for him.
Yes,
but
and yet
it doesn't.
She goes there anyway.
We
don't have any record of her actually stopping a rebellion, but the fact that she can move freely says something. I don't know if it says she's insane or just very good, but she does it. The wars are not going well for Charles. The rebellions are not going well, but Charles would not stop trying to expand. And on January 5th, 1477, Charles was killed in a battle against Swiss mercenaries. They are everywhere.
They are.
Everywhere. You'll always find Swiss mercenaries.
And he has his face eaten off by wolves.
Yes, he does. Margaret is now the Dowager Duchess of Burgundy, but how on earth does she manage to keep enough power and political savvy to continue to be a thorn in the side of Henry VII? He's not there. We haven't gotten to that yet.
No.
And she no longer even has the wink and the nod of political influence through her husband. He's gone.
Well, I was thinking, while you were talking about how politically savvy she seemed to be becoming, I was sort of mulling over how this would help her in future times when she's branching out on her own and helping Simnel and Perkin.
We will find out next time.
She's not quite the character I was expecting.
Not at all! Not at all. I love her. Spoiler. This was so much fun to read about.
Excellent. Good. To find out about why Henry hates her. Well, we know why Henry hates her. I don't know why I'm speculating.
Why everybody hates her. Yeah. Goodbye.
Goodbye.